It's my pleasure to welcome Cody Cornell, co-founder and chief strategy officer of low-code security automation vendor Swimlane. We talk about how Swimlane overcame the issues caused by COVID, how the sales process has changed in 2023, and some golden advice for entrepreneurs thinking of starting their own business. I'm Oliver Legg, co-founder of Aspiron Search. Enjoy the show. Well, it's a pleasure to welcome Cody Cornell, the founder and CSO of Swimlane. How's things, Cody?
Things are good. Excited to be on.
Absolutely. Where are you calling in from today? Home in Colorado?
Yeah, I'm here in the Swimlane headquarters office here, which is in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah. No, awesome. And you were just talking me through your rock poster or frame picture behind us. So I think we've agreed that the UK certainly set the tone in rock and the progression of rock music.
Oh yeah, obviously, between the Beatles and the Led Zeppelin, you know, they get a lot of credit for, I think, a lot of at least the music that I listen to. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I'm sure a lot of listeners will know the name Swimlane, but for people that aren't aware of who you guys are, what is Swimlane? What are you here to try and do in the security sector?
Yeah, as a bit of background, I spent probably 15 years doing security operations, and doing that realized that it was really difficult to keep up with everything that's going on, and Swimlane was really born out of that, which is it's a low code security automation system. It's designed to help folks automate a lot of the really burdensome and repetitive tasks that security teams, regardless if they're in the SOC or the compliance team, whatever it might be, have to do every day that, sometimes is not the most exciting things to do on a daily basis. It really automates a lot of that work. And, it's something that we've been doing for almost 10 years now.
Yeah, awesome. And for it's another term that seems to get kind of thrown around frequently, but for people that don't truly understand what it means, the term low code security platform, what does that actually mean in basic and layman's terms?
Yeah, if you were to ask like the big analyst firms, the Gartners of the world, they would categorize Swimlane as a SOAR product, right? Security, orchestration, automation, response. We think that's a little bit of a narrow definition, and that's just because of how we've built what we have. But low code for us is really that ability for people to build kind of security-centric applications. You see a lot of low code applications that live, for people that are building mobile apps or they're building applications for e-commerce, whatever it might be. A lot of security teams need applications. You need an application that will help users request access to a third-party website or submit a phishing email or whatever it might be. That there's a lot of these applications that teams need, and that's really what Swimlane is designed to do is help those people build those use cases and solve for those problems both inside and outside of the SOC.
Yeah, awesome. And so does that mean it benefits companies with smaller in-house security teams more than the larger businesses with fully established security teams, or is there a play across both of those aspects?
I think there's a benefit to both. I think the folks that we see typically adopting are probably larger organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Our customer base is kind of the Fortune 500, Global 2000 style customers, and for them, they're really trying to get some economies of scale. They've made investments. They have all the kind of basics in place, and they're really trying to scale. We do have smaller customers that are using the platform that see a lot of benefit because they just don't have the people. So automation is super valuable for them. But I'd say by and large, what you see is established organizations that are either internalizing security practices or maturing their security practices. Leveraging automation to really just get more bang for the buck.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you had a record year in 2022. Opened a lot more regions and had some, I believe it was 14 Fortune 500 wins, which is impressive for still a growth stage business. And we'll come on to the success and in particular the way that you have led Swimlane to succeed in the very challenging 2023 shortly. But before that, really keen to just go back into your background and how did you get into security and the operational side of security to now being the CSO of a leading security vendor?
Yeah, it's kind of an unconventional trajectory. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Montana, not exactly a tech hub. more of a cow town than anything else. But I spent 5 years in the service, and when I got out of the service, I started working for the federal government. So spent a lot of time, doing security programs around vulnerability management and endpoint security, but really started migrating into, security ops, right? So building SOC teams, all the procedures, recruiting this, the teams, being a SOC manager, all that fun stuff, and through that experience, doing it for financial services organizations and managed service providers, and really started building what again would have been kind of individual automation systems. Like for the Department of Defense, we built an automation system. It was kind of a amalgamation of a bunch of different things that we put together. It really solves the similar problem with what we were doing in Swimlane, which was at the time was hundreds of thousands of DLP alerts that were we were dealing with as a really small team, and how do we actually automate that work, because there's no way we can actually triage each one of these by hand. So did something very similar for financial services, and then kind of started consulting and realized, wait a minute, shouldn't there be a piece of technology that actually works across every organization that they could use to solve the same problems that we were experiencing? And that's when we started back in 2012 started building Swimlane, which was our goal was to build a really dynamic and flexible platform that would allow people to solve a huge variety of security problems. And that's what we've been working on ever since.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, you're coming up to a decade in now, so it's a good amount of time. Series C, right? It was a 70 mil round last summer.
Yeah, I'd say we announced it last summer. We did a $70 million round. It was great. We had a new lead investor in Activate. Also had kind of we had existing investors kind of come in as well. So it was a good round, and excited to see what we've been able to do with it and grow. And as you mentioned, a lot of international expansion for us, both on the go-to-market front, but also technical support. We have distributed professional services, R&D. So it's been an interesting kind of maturity process over the last few years, and going from being a pretty much US centric organization by and large. We've had international customers for a long time, but we've always serviced them from here, and now we're very much an international organization.
How has that changed your I know you transitioned from CEO to CSO fairly recently, but when you started opening APAC and EMEA and then new countries within APAC like Japan, how did that change your role as a CEO at this time?
Yeah, I mean, so I think Jim has been the CEO for coming up on 3 years now. So a lot of the international expansion, we'd started into Europe, and we had started into Australia when I was still the CEO. The nice thing is, when Jim came on board, he had a ton of experience expanding internationally. He built a public company. He built a couple other startups all the way up through acquisition, and in doing that, he'd had experience on kind of what are the steps. How do we evaluate a region for its success, and then how do you make that decision to go into that region? And a lot of it, especially at our stage, is it's people centric, right? Getting that first hire that's going to be in that region, that has a network that can start driving success, both in sales but also customer success, is super important, because they're so far from HQ, and as a startup, you're always working somewhat chaotically, and they need to be able to work on their own and be successful. So really finding the right people, and just making sure you can be successful in the market, right? There's definitely, different distribution models. In Europe, it's a very much a two-tier distribution model with distributors and resellers, versus the US, where there's a lot more direct selling. Other regions like the Middle East and APJ are very much like that. So you got to be kind of ready to support those different go-to-market motions, and also just different like support expectations, right? Some folks very happy to deal with English support folks. Some folks need those people to be in region. Language, things like that are super important. So it's hard to be. It's easy to see the opportunity to grow business. You have to be very realistic about what you can support successfully and actually grow over time, because restarting can be very painful. So,
one of the most common requests and piece of work that Asperon works on is Israeli companies looking to hire their first go-to-market leaders or go-to-market teams in the US. And
Right.
it's the most common request, and it's the most common thing that they get wrong. And it can set them back months, years, tens of millions in revenue. Was there an occasion where you got it wrong when you were expanding into a new region, or did you manage to ace it every single time first time?
I would say that, when we moved into the Middle East, it was right before COVID. So I would say that that was particularly difficult just because, a region, it takes a lot. If you're going to open up a new region, you probably better expect to be putting in a year to 18 months before you really start seeing really consistent, predictable, success, right? So, and then when you go into a region and then you go into, an unprecedented global pandemic, that really slowed things down. It really prevented us from getting some momentum. I mentioned the restarts are hard, and that is an example of where we kind of had to restart a region. And, thankfully, we kicked that off probably, it was about a year ago, actually. Right now, the Tech Summit in Dubai is probably the biggest, tech conference in the world. And that runs every year. And that's where we did our kickoff last year. It's been very successful. And I think that's, mostly attributed to getting the right people. I think that we have the right regional leadership and sales folks and things like that, sales engineers and all the stuff that goes along with that in that patch. And because of that, it's been successful, but it did require us to do it twice, which is, as you mentioned, always painful.
And what other than getting the right people, what else did you do differently second time around?
I
there
think,
wasn't a global pandemic coming on, which
that helped for
which
sure.
definitely would have helped.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that we had become a little bit more international organization, right? So at that time, we had been supporting Australia and Europe. Middle East starts creeping into that, really hard to cover time zone. As there's, India and the Middle East, and these are just time zone wise, they're way off. And, when you need access to engineering help or tech support, I think that we didn't have as much maturity, and the organization wasn't as robust at the time. And I think, we've expanded a lot. So now we have, a true kind of 24/7 around the clock support. So those folks they don't feel quite as isolated. They don't feel quite as, they don't have to be quite as self-sufficient as probably the first group of people that went into that region did. Because, we have better support. There's people in a staggered set of time zones as opposed to just, the US time zones.
Do you think a lot of firms do just try and do you think you were kind of in this scenario as well? Do you think a lot of firms just try and do those things too soon, and they do try and open into regions or expand into completely different brand new territories before the wider business is ready?
I don't know that I have a lot of data points on, you hear about successes, but you don't hear a lot about failures. That's human nature, is to hide those a little bit. I think, a little bit less than do I think they did or didn't, because I'll be honest, I probably don't have enough data to answer that, but I think you have to really think about your both your sales motion and your support needs. If you're selling a product-led tool that is, self-supportable, and the transactions are fairly straightforward, I think your ability to move internationally is probably a lot easier, or the barrier to entry is probably a little bit lower. You probably have to think a lot more about localization and things like that. But as far as can I go into that region, it's probably a little bit different than if I'm a field sales organization where I have to engage with channel and all these different things. So I think you just have to be really thoughtful about what does it take to sell your product in that region? What does it take to support your product in that region? What are their expectations from a customer success perspective? And, be willing to make that investment, and know that you have to make that investment for, call it a year to two before you're going to really feel like, it's working or not. And, that's tough. I mean, when you have limited resources, those bets can be hard. But if they work, they pay off tremendously. So.
Yeah, for sure, and it's clearly paying off second time around. And so, I mean, rewinding to your raise last summer. So, excellent raise. It was definitely at a time where there was, the peak of funding into the cybersecurity world that there's ever been. And then into 2023, everything slowed down. Completely different markets. what was that period like for Swimlane, and how did you manage to kind of still be successfully growing kind of nearly 12 months on from that now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for better or worse, we probably missed, you could argue either side. November of 2021 was like peak hysteria, right? That's when, companies with a couple $1 million of ARR were raising $1 billion valuations and all of that craziness, which really kind of, to your point, as you move into 22 and 23, really kind of compounds the complexity of managing a business. We raised in May of 22. So I would say it was a much more kind of thoughtful and well-timed raise for us, just because it allowed us to be a little kind of outside of the hysteria that was 2021. But I think anytime you're going to take money from anybody, you have to have a plan that you feel like you can execute. That the execution of that has to be based on historical data. All the classic stuff. I mean, you guys help folks kind of build strategies. So, you talk about quota coverage and demand generation and, what's your average deal size and, how much channel contribution can you get? And there's all of these things that, you can grab the industry norm and say, this is what most people experience, but you really need to look back at your own historical data and go, what can we actually do? And then you have to offset that, with, what is, the economy going to do? And that's I think the hardest part. Things that are under your own control, you can really turn the dial on. I can invest into things that are working. I can pull back on things that are not. But when you're dealing with things that are just entirely outside of your control, that's the part where you have to make, I would say, calculated bets, which is, do I need to pull back to conserve capital so that I can have more time to execute a plan? Or is this a chance when all of my competitors are pulling back and I can lean in and go take market share? So you have you got to be, again, realistic with like, what can we do if you have a product that goes and you can sell via SEO and pay-per-click, maybe you can ramp up and it's a good moment to go get very inexpensive pay-per-click and drive a lot of demand and get people that are ascending into your product. If you have a field sales motion, you got to be more realistic. What are the sales cycles going to look like? Our procurement team's going to tighten this, the purse strings per se. Like you got to be, thoughtful about that. And I think that's hard to do because, if anybody could predict the economy, they probably wouldn't be working because they would be infinitely wealthy. So.
Yeah. Highlight. And what have you seen change in the sales cycle? Because companies and CROs, CEOs, C-level across the board are seeing a very different sales process, sales cycle in terms of time, but then also buying persona than we were, 18 months ago, even 12 months ago. So what have you seen from Swimlane's side?
Yeah, from Swimlane's side, and obviously talk to a lot of other founders and execs that are running organizations. There's definitely been not a tale of two cities, but a pretty drastic difference between folks that are selling into like SMB. So if I traditionally sold a product that was adopted by startups, obviously there was new startups every day. The seat counts were growing in those startups. Like the ability to really grow and scale, which they've definitely benefited from. Basically, probably going back to 2010 all the way through 2021. That got harder. That got much more difficult. Obviously people weren't hiring as fast. Seat count wasn't growing. People were becoming much more sensitive to SaaS spend and all of these things. So that was a little bit harder. We sell to bigger organizations, right? So if you're selling to big blue chip, publicly traded organizations, they're generally, they have budget changes. That's something we've seen is right. Used to be, every year you'd see 5 or 7% uplift in budget, which always give them room to go buy more tools or for us to, expand within those accounts. And that definitely leveled off. I don't think anybody's reducing security spend right now, but there's definitely some appetite to stabilize. And there's a lot more expectation that they're going to get more value out of the investments that they are making. So we see in the sales process, the sales process does lengthen a little bit, and more personalities, to your point, come into that sales process. It used to be, if you could get to the CISO and they budget approved it, it was fine. But now there's even, budget scrutiny above and beyond that, the CFO. So the sales process now also probably includes a business case and a business justification and why they're spending the money and what value do they expect to get from it, and more scrutiny around contractual terms, right? Is it multi-year? Do we get, what kind of discount do we get? Are we preventing ourselves from, pricing escalation in out years? Like there's all of these things that typically kind of in boom times, people just kind of wave their hands and just keep rolling. Isn't actually the case now, right? There's a lot more scrutiny coming into each and every dollar spent. So yeah, those are some of the things that we've seen. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I mean, it comes back to it's if your product isn't essential, it's not getting purchased right now.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, budgets were a lot looser, and sales process in some instances were a bit looser last year and the year before, and much before that as well. We've also seen it from a hiring perspective as well, though, and I'm not sure what your take is on this, but there were definitely a lot of people that have been laid off over the last year or so that really probably shouldn't have been hired in the first place, because along with buying processes being a little bit looser, hiring processes were as well, because people needed kind of average people to fill those orders. So I don't know what your take is on that, and how that's now changed with where we are in October 2023.
Yeah, I think, as long as I can remember, hiring security folks has been, terribly difficult, right? There's, we actually ran a survey with, I think it was 1,000 respondents, and I think 80% of them said they're never going to be fully staffed. That's a staggering statistic. But what we have heard from folks, especially this year, is that, they've actually been for folks that have openings, that have budget, that are willing to kind of, look nationally for talent, they've actually done a lot better this year, just because hiring has slowed kind of dramatic, across sectors, and it's allowed them to kind of fill some of these spots. Now they're going, all right, when the economy changes, we go back to a boom time, or interest rates fall, or like, I'm not an economist, whatever is going to change the dynamic of the economy that will send us something more similar to maybe like 2018 through 2020. Can they keep those people, right? Because they feel like there is a moment right now where they're starting to attract folks that typically felt out of reach, both from a skills perspective and just from a volume perspective. But now they're kind of getting into the spot where they're like, okay, great, I've finally filled this role and it's finally feels stable. Now I'm terrified of what happens, when something changes. So yeah, but it's still hard. I mean, you still see a lot of, government organizations hiring junior people, getting them kind of up to, base skills, and those people turning out. Managed service providers have that same problem. There's just not everybody can pay what the big financial services organizations pay for security talent, and that just, unfortunately, people are human. They're going to go and do what's right for themselves and their families and things like that. But that makes for a lot of, personnel turn, especially in I would say the junior ranks from a cybersecurity perspective, not quite as much in the senior ranks, but there's still some pain there.
Yeah. And I mean, you're ex-security, well, you still are a security professional, but you're from industry, so you'll be able to speak to this pretty well. But what was your very first route into your first security role? Because we've got a program where we're trying to help that transition and get aspiring security folks their first role. And the difficulty isn't finding people that have the coachable skills. It's not finding the people that want to work in security and are committed to it. It's finding the companies that are willing to hire an entry-level person and train them up, without falling into the same problems you said about government and MSSP. So how did you do it? What was your route in when you first got into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, we're rolling the clock back to the turn of the century, to make myself feel really old here. I think the security was a little different then, right? I mean, people that were going into security were going into security. It was like, big ass, as opposed to now where, security is much more segmented. Like there's a lot more specialties than there was, I would say, when I joined into the industry, right? So I actually was working as a Unix administrator. I was on the back end of a bunch of, hardening, and in the DoD it's called the STIG process, which is basically like the system hardening. Like, hey, you're running a Solaris server. The Solaris server has to have these configurations in order to be put on the network. So I was learning kind of security through system administration work, and then that really gave me an opportunity to, when kind of vulnerability management was having its, first foray into the world, right? Some of the early vulnerability scanners. There wasn't a lot of people that could look at the scan results and go, I actually know what to do to remediate the findings that we're finding with these scanners. So that was my kind of segue into security, is that I was able to kind of transition from being a system administrator of, Unix and Linux servers into saying, hey, I know what these scan results are saying. Like, I know what an Apache server is, and I know why, the htaccess file is looking the way that it looks, and what do I got to do to actually fix this problem, right? And those are some of the most like elementary fixes, but there was a lot of folks that could run the scan but didn't actually know what was going on the other side. And for me, that was how I was able to transition to security, because I was filling a void on that team. So that was how I made that transition. And yeah, that's how it all got started.
Yeah. And did you see yourself 20 years later, nearly 25 years later, being the founder, co-founder and CSO of a high growth business, or was that did that just become a bit of a pipe dream?
Yeah, I mean, I had always wanted to start a company, even as a kid. But I'd always assumed it would be like a sandwich shop or something. Like I never expected to be a venture-backed tech company. Like, that was never really in the. But I always wanted to have my own business. That was something that was interesting. And the way that I found myself into that is after working in industry for big organizations and government and things like that, just started consulting. I mean, that was kind of what I did. It was me and the co-founder of Swimlane, Brian, actually founded another before that, a consulting company where we were doing consulting for the government and for commercial organizations, and that was kind of that's how we tipped put our toes into the water of running a business. And so we did that for a number of years, and it was inside of that company that we started building the software. And at that point, we had to split it out, because a consulting company and a technology company, especially if you want to be venture backed, are two very different animals. So I stepped out of the consulting business. He continued to run it. And thank God he did, because without the money from that consulting company, Swimlane would never existed. We took all the profits and funded the technology company. And, that's how we made it work. So it was more incidental than thoughtful, I guess. It was more, I know there's a problem. Let's try to build something that solves the problem. And then I'd never worked at a vendor before. I'd always been, a practitioner inside of organizations. So there was a lot of hard lessons for many years, just because we didn't know anything about back office or product management or engineering or go-to-market or sales or marketing. They were all new. I'd never worked at a big vendor before where I at least could have seen some of these things. And that's something that, I tell a lot of folks, like, if you want to start a company, probably should go work at one that's like does something similar to what you're doing, so you can kind of see what all the functions are, and what does someone who's good at a function act like, and what do they do, and what is their experience, and how do they respond to questions. We had to learn all that stuff the hard way, unfortunately.
Sometimes it's the best way. And you said something in our call prior to in the run up to this about the kind of the creeping doubt of should I or shouldn't I. And where did that come in when kind of deciding to start the business?
Yeah, I mean, if I think back, and if I'm really honest, I think there was three of us. Myself and Brian, and then we'd hired a developer, Austin, who was helping us build stuff inside of our consulting practice. And they very much wanted to start a software company. And I very much was like, guys, we don't know how to do this. We've never done it before. Like, this is not our core. We have a lot of customers that love our consulting services, and the business is going well. It's growing, at a reasonable pace. Like, this is a massive departure from, what we are doing right now. And I think, so I was initially the odd man out. The thing that changed it is, I'll give Austin credit. He just on nights and weekends started building something. And, I saw it and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the process. I was so excited to see something that, I thought could help and, change the way that we do work, and watch it iterate, and the process of interacting, with designers and engineers and watching that iterative process happen. It was super addictive. Like, I can't imagine doing any other work now. It's such a fulfilling process that I just didn't know existed. And That took me from skeptic to, totally, this is what I want to do, and this is how I want to spend my working hours. So yeah, and then over time we got the prototype up and we showed it to people, and then realized the mechanics of it required us to get it outside of the consulting company, and spun it out of the consulting company. And then you just start reading a lot of books and talking to a lot of people about all the other things you got to figure out to make that a reality. So
yeah, I can't disagree with that one. What I'll probably put you on the spot here, but what whether it's tech or whether it's on the business or inspiration side, what's the best book that had the biggest impact?
I think for me, like the one of the ones that stood out for me early was Jason Lemkin's Predictable Revenue. And for me, it was, I didn't understand how a modern sales process worked. Right. So again, like I was never an engineer, right? R&Ding and building product and being a developer is a whole discipline. Like I was a practitioner, right? So that was all new to me, but I could at least understand it because like it made sense to me. I'd done web application security testing, and I understood, databases were, and I understood the software development lifecycle, because you kind of have to know that for security. But so at least I felt I had, but like, how do you go to market and get somebody to buy your thing? And that I didn't know what I didn't know what demand generation was. I didn't know the different vectors for collecting leads. I didn't understand conversion rates. I didn't know what an SDR or BDR was. Like I didn't know the difference between field sales and channel sales and direct sales and product-led growth. Like that was all just foreign to me. So reading that book was an eye-opener. I was like, oh, holy cow. There's this whole other side of this thing that we want to do that I've never been exposed to in my life. Like I've responded to RFPs. I worked at like IBM. So, every once in a while you get pulled in like, hey, help me put a reference architecture together for XYZ thing. But I'd never been like, I'm going to call somebody and say, hey, have you heard of this? And would it be beneficial for you? Like that whole motion was just, it was totally foreign. So that for me, that's when I realized, one, I was way out of my depth. And then I had to consume. So then it was just like everything I could get my hands on, if it was marketing or R&D or product management or whatever it was just fundraising, how to negotiate a fundraising deal. Like everything required a book. And that works for a while, but eventually you need people that actually have experience doing this stuff. You can't be reading a book to make every decision. It takes too damn long.
It served. I think you can safely say it served you reasonably well.
It
got you to the stage where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, but if I think back to that inflection point where we we'd built the business up, pretty well, and then Jim joined. There was a moment, right, where you're talking to the board and you realize that you're spending a lot of money, right? I mean, venture-backed companies spend a lot of cash to keep going, and the thing that, and being a CEO of a growth company is about making decisions with incomplete data. Like that's what you're constantly doing. Should we go into that region? Should we build that feature? And there's no like obvious answer. You can try to be data driven as you want to be, but you're trying to make decisions on things that just have never happened before. And when you're young and you're not spending a lot of cash, or you're just spending your own time, you can take the time to go read and learn and ask a bunch of questions. But as the burn continues, as it goes up over time, you have to make decisions faster because that delay causes us money. And the way you improve making decisions with incomplete data is experience. And that's the thing that Jim has really, helped me a lot with. And I've learned a ton from is I've watched how he rationalizes based on his experience, the decisions that he makes, and also, the way we've wrapped a leadership team around that. So that's been really beneficial for me. It's just experience you can only get when, working with, I guess in this case would be almost a mentor in that sense. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, as I say, it's working for you guys, and excited to see what you've got in store for Q4 in 2024. Anything you can give us a heads up on for what we can be expecting out of Swimlane?
What can I share? There's some pretty exciting product announcements. It will probably come early or probably mid to late January. We've got some pretty exciting stuff that we're working on that we're really excited about. We think the definition of SOAR is becoming very murky, and the opportunity for automation within security is actually growing. But the definition of how you solve that problem has changed pretty dramatically. So I'm pretty excited about what our engineering team product and engineering team has put together. And and what we're going to be bringing to market. I think it's pretty exciting. And, that would be the tech in me says that's the thing to look out for. The business results are actually pretty interesting too, but I generally have a tendency to focus on the tech.
Yeah, well, stay true to it. Well, Cody, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great opportunity to delve into a few things that I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't have heard from you before. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, man. We hope you've enjoyed this latest episode of CyberBytes, the podcast. Please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and tell your friends. If you want to explore being a guest or how Aspire on Search can help you build high-performing security and go-to-market teams, then get in touch on LinkedIn or info@aspireonsearch.com.